Okay then. All right then, Andrew. Thanks for joining us. I just want you to tell us about your flying career in detail, sort of where it all started, types flown, where you are today, and then when you're finished, we'll just ask you questions.
Yeah, I guess what might work for this portion. I recently had to go through an interview as I'm transitioning right now from active duty to Air National Guard, and also I got hired to do civilian flying, commercial flying with Delta. So I'll be piloting that on the side of my Air National Guard gig, but I had to give them, for my interview purposes, I had to give them my whole background and everything. So that snippet will actually work pretty well right here. So forgive me if it sounds a little bit like I'm applying for a job, but we'll try to cut down on that to the maximum extent. Yeah, the way that I got started in aviation, I didn't think growing up necessarily that I wanted to do it. I was born in Tacoma, Washington, on the other side of the states, West Coast, where my dad was flying Eagles at the time. So me and my dad have flown the same jet. He flew the F-15A that then became the F-15C. And I, of course, fly the F-15C now. And I think when I was in high school, secondary school, however we want to translate, I sort of saw it as like the family business or something. It was the idea that if I was doing what he did, I'd be following in his footsteps. I wasn't making a name for myself or something like that. It sounds foolish now, even as I say it out loud, but I remember talking with my mom, and as I was looking at colleges, looking at universities, she said, well, it's really foolish to do something just because somebody else does it, but it might be more foolish to not do something just because somebody else did it. And after that, it was a total change in my mentality. And I decided to go to the Air Force Academy. I knew I wanted to fly planes, and I knew at that point that I wanted to fly fighters as my dream personally. Nothing against my heavy brethren, but that was just what I wanted to do. And so graduated from the Air Force Academy, and I went on to pilot training at Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi. So Southeast, moving around, although I had grown up in Atlanta, so it wasn't too much of a change in terms of climate and culture. And I flew the T6 there and the T38, which is the standard pilot training flow for any students. And right after graduation and getting my wings, I stuck around as a first assignment instructor pilot. So I was an instructor in the T6 for another 3.5 years or so. And then I was awarded the F-15 as a follow-on assignment. And I went to training for the F-15 in Klamath Falls, which is in Oregon. So back up to the Northwest, back up closer to Washington. And flew there for the training, got qualified. That takes about a year. So you got, all told, we're talking a year for pilot training, 3 years or so for my first assignment instructor pilot tour, another year for F-15C qualification training, and then out to Lakenheath. And at Lakenheath, I got to, fly there for just over 3 years. I guess it was right at 3 years by the time I actually walked out the door, and deployed with the Grim Reapers to Syria. So spent about 6 months there, and actually also out to Al Dhafra, but it was on the same deployment. So we just kind of deployed further. And yeah, that kind of summarizes the whole thing until I got back here to the States. So my most recent assignment for the past 3 years, or coming up on 2.5-ish now, has been the director of operations at WESUP, the Weapon Systems Evaluation Program at Tyndall Air Force Base, where we shoot the missiles at the drones. So if you ever read an article about somebody in the mainland of Florida walking along the beach and they find some weird looking orange drone that says property of US Air Force, those are the things that we shoot at for the most part, or we shoot at the full scale drones, which are F-16s that have been fitted to be flown by a computer. So remote control, it's not the computer doing it by itself. Somebody on the ground is sitting there and piloting the F-16. And we go out there in our various airframes, myself and pilots from the F-22, F-35, F-16. We don't have any A-10 guys right now. We have some Navy F-18 attached pilots, and we all go out there and shoot at the drones, or we take visiting units that are coming through to get shooter experience, and they shoot at the drones. And we gather the data, and we figure out how the missiles work, and we upgrade software and all that sort of stuff, or we pass it to Raytheon to tell them to do it. And that's what I've been doing for the past 2.5 years back here at Tyndall. And now I'm moving on to, in just a little bit, I'll be moving on to Delta Airlines as my part-time job. And my other part-time job will be Air National Guard with the state of Louisiana, still flying the C model and getting to, put warheads on foreheads, as we say, although I don't drop bombs. So it's still something we say, but I don't know how many of those missiles are actually hitting somebody in the face. yeah, that's basically the gist.
Well, I'll let Keith start. Go on, Keith. If you've got anything, you're usually the first person to ask the question.
Uh, Not at the moment, Matt. I'll think of something. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Go on, somebody else have a go.
No worries.
I'll start then. Do you miss your time at RF Lakenheath? Did you sort of enjoy it? And how was that for you, sort of being in the UK?
I loved being in the UK. I tell people all the time that if they have the chance to live abroad, but specifically the advantage to living abroad in the UK of not having to learn another language, although there were some differences, obviously. I thought it was great. My family getting to travel, my kids going to, my two boys, their first school. I guess my oldest had a little bit of time in school before we left the States, but for the boys, their first school was right there at Guildhall Feffman in Bury St. Edmunds. So they got the international experience. I found the UK incredibly comfortable. The only thing I would say to people, and I do say this when I get asked the question, is it's still not home. And I think when I encounter people who, when I encounter UK residents who are living here in the States, that's kind of their same feedback too, is it's great. We share a lot of similar culture stuff, but eventually you start to long for, what you're most familiar with. And for me, getting back to the States was refreshing, although I do miss it. And I hope to, come back over there at some point. I don't know. I've been out a few times since then just to fly a little bit on TDYs, but those are always a temporary duty assignment. Those are always a couple weeks at a time. I think I did it twice. Once was to just go out there and get some flying currency, and I was familiar with the area, and we had some time where we weren't shooting missiles back here. And the second time was to bring that last 4 ship of Eagles back home. I don't think I have the patch around here right now, but somewhere I have a patch with my name on it that they made, because the last 4 ship of Eagles that was actually brought back to the States, they texted me and said, can you make it out to Lakenheath this weekend and help us get these jets back? We're running out of pilots, because they'd already started PCSing everybody, already started moving everybody. So that's a long answer to your question, but I do miss it. I want to get back out there. I hope I get other opportunities to get back out there. And yeah, it was great. Some of the best flying for sure, but also some of the best time of my life for my growing family.
All right, and then I'll get my question in early, because usually I say this at the end. But what would you say sort of has been the most challenging moment in your career? Like an event, like has there ever been an event that's tested your skills, i.e. bird strike, or something like that? Something you could tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think on the T6 instructional side, you're always kind of talking about, we call them kids, even though they're just younger officers. When we're putting the kids through training, when we're putting the officers through flight school, you're always talking about how they're trying to kill you. So the self-preservation instinct isn't quite there yet. And I have a few stories from that I'll probably just summarize by saying there's a lot of times that I felt tested there, but that's all just the basic flying skills. There's nothing tactical about it. And so I'll probably use an F-15 story to make it a little more interesting. The T6 stuff was always like, okay, maybe there's language barriers. I remember a student specifically from Chad who was there, and he spoke everything but English very well. He spoke English acceptably, but only in an aviation sense. The French and some other languages that he spoke much more fluently were not very helpful to any of us as his instructors. And I remember he just did not have whatever it was that we can measure in a person for their self-preservation instinct, their ability to take instruction and grow. Just it stagnated at a certain point, and we never got comfortable enough to solo him, because most of us as instructors at the time thought, if we do this, it's on us. If he, heaven forbid, morts himself at the end of the runway or something, because the first solo is just a pattern solo there for pilot training. So we just thought, this is not, I'm not comfortable signing off on this guy's life in terms of, go have a go, and you're not qualified by the way that we saw it. So that was somebody we washed out of training, and I feel like that was a big test of more the leadership and the basic flying stuff, but it wasn't so much like the actual piloting that was the problem there. If I fast forward to an F-15 story, and probably my greatest test, there were several times in Syria being across the line from Russian fullbacks or flankers, usually Su-34s and 35s. And you're within ranges where, at the completely unclassified Zoom talk level, you're within ranges where your normal tactics don't make a ton of sense. You're already close enough to where you're not using beyond visual range missiles, or you are, but you're quickly approaching within visual range engagement. But everybody's still going to be loaded out fully with missiles. So this isn't a guns only dogfighting type solution. There's not really one available to you. You'd probably just be trading AMRAAMs with archers from them, or whatever loadout you have available to you as you go to the merge. And you're probably trying to dodge a lot of missiles in flight as you both are already inside ranges that make any sort of sense. And several times the ROE was muddy enough over there. The rules of engagement were muddy enough over there for what actually constituted hostile act or hostile intent. It's a conflated, confusing situation in terms of the Syrians, the Russians, everybody involved, and different factions and groups. Meanwhile, everybody's trying to destroy ISIS. And oh, by the way, the alliances are changing, frequently in that area. So there were several times where I thought the test was, we probably would have been within our rights to hit the button, but nobody wants to start World War III. But you also don't want to be the guy who doesn't shoot when it's time to shoot. And that was probably the most tactical test of kind of falling back on your training and having a cool hand about things, so that if somebody's going to start it, I'd rather it not be me, but I'll answer it if I have to. And then just in terms of probably the most harrowing thing that wasn't tactics wise was a time in Syria where I'm climbing out. I was still a wingman at the time when we first showed up, so I was not leading this formation. It was another pilot, call sign Blaster, who was leading us. We were just a 2-ship, and we go to do an operations check after the tanker. So we just tanked and topped off gas, and we're at 33,000 feet or so, rounding the east side of Syria to go up toward an area called Manbij, which is in the north of Syria. You kind of make your way up the Euphrates River Valley, you crank west, and then you get over to Manbij, where we're going to do combat air patrol. And while I'm still getting the operations check going, I look down, I notice the cabin altimeter, the cockpit altimeter looks like, and I'm processing it about the rate that I'm saying it to you. I'm like, that looks like it also says 33,000, which is not supposed to happen, right? The cabin altitude should be something that, at least with the life support equipment I'm wearing, keeps everything in a scheduled pressure change from sea level that I can withstand, or that most pilots can withstand. And that's not what it says. It says 33,000. We're at 33,000, which would imply that my cabin is not pressurizing at all. And at about that rate, I'm going, okay, I know what to do here. The only reason I even noticed it was I dropped my mask to take a sip of water. And as soon as I did that, I almost instantly felt that change that comes from the beginning onsets of hypoxia. And for me, my symptoms are a little lightheaded, kind of euphoric. Things are good, right? Which is not the symptom you want to have for a critical, life-threatening emergency. But I went, okay, the air tastes a little funny. I feel a little bit, something's not right. And that's when I looked down and started this processing and realized I was at ambient altitude. And basically there's no air, right? Time of useful consciousness at 33,000 feet without pressurization is somewhere on the order, like if I kept my mask down, somewhere on the order of inside a minute. So I would have had another 30 seconds, let's call it, before things start getting real loopy, and I might not be able to do the training that I'm supposed to do to, survive. So I tell Blaster, I remember him being off the left side. I key the mic and I put my mask up kind of all at once. So he hears a bunch of rustling and ruffling, and I do that and click it close. And then I turn the regulator to full force oxygen, 100%. And I just am keying the mic still. And I said, Blaster, I'm at ambient, which is not a good radio call, but it was all I could think to say at the time. I was already just a little bit loopy from the lack of oxygen. And I watch him without hesitation just say, all right, take it down. and he over rotates to 180 degrees of bank, inverted, and starts pulling down while he also calls Kingpin, which is the controlling agency there, and lets them know that we're in an emergency descent. And at this point, I'm kind of just going through the motions. I remember I'm just following him because I'm getting that sensation of like, oh, okay, just look at this, airplanes, flying is neat, that kind of stuff. And I follow him down to a nominal altitude, and we take it all back. Everybody obviously survived. I'm still here. We land on the ground. The flight doc meets me, get evaluated for physiological emergency and whatnot. And that's when they started going over the, hey, you were definitely getting hypoxic. This is the time of useful consciousness you had. Good on you for talking to your flight lead, who basically saved my life, is what I credit Blaster for to this day. And yeah, that was probably the most harrowing thing that I've been involved in flying wise, and the time that I did not realize how close I came to something being much more catastrophic, because it worked out just fine, but it was a result of rote following of training techniques for self-preservation. So grateful to have been through it, and it definitely made me a better pilot, I'd say that.
Oh, that's great. And here you are today. So
Here I am.
Thank you for answering that.
Absolutely.
Did Matthew have a question?
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you, if you were to start your career all over, would you still choose to fly the F-15, or would you choose another aircraft?
Yeah, that's a great question. Knowing what I know now, I would still choose the F-15. She's the only one for me, but that wasn't how I felt at the time that I actually, when I say I was awarded the F-15 out of that assignment as an instructor in pilot training, you still make what the Air Force calls a dream sheet, and it's what it sounds like, right? These are my dreams, these are my hopes, these are my aspirations, and you don't know what you don't know. So in my case, I put all the 5th gen stuff at the top. So 5th generation fighters being F-22, F-35, or there's one other one where we can, in the Air Force, you can go fly the T-38 for a while as a rated qualified instructor pilot, and you will be guaranteed a follow-on to the F-22. So those are the 3 that you can put down on a dream sheet, or that I could have for, okay, you can be F-22, F-35, or T-38 with F-22 follow-on. And I put all 3 of those, if I recall correctly, I think I put all 3 of those with the F-15 being the first 4th gen fighter that I put down. Because at the time I thought, well, if I'm going to fly a fighter, I want to fly the shiniest, the newest, the best. And I had no idea at this point differences in mission sets. And I mean, I knew that the F-15 was air to air, and I knew that so was the F-22. But I didn't know, why is it better to have a 4 ship of F-15s plus a 4 ship of F-22s instead of an 8 ship of either? And now, knowing some of those nuances and differences, I would pick the F-15 over again. If I have to go back to that point, and I'm back to not knowing what I don't know, I'm probably going to wind up putting down the F-22 or F-35 again, just because I thought, man, the newest, the latest and greatest, right? But definitely going back again right now, it would be the F-15.
Hi there. You say that you're joining Delta.
Yeah.
That must be quite a transition from flying an F-15 sort of Ferrari to sort of a fairly heavy aeroplane. What do you see is perhaps your biggest challenge with that?
Yeah, I think that some of the excitement might not be, you're no longer getting, my dad actually said it to me, because I remember I said my dad flew F-15s, and believe it or not, I wound up going into the family business because my dad flew F-15s, and then he also flew for Delta. So by the time I was growing up, he was a Delta pilot who was getting out of the Air National Guard. I was born a little bit later in his life than my kids for my life, but he said to me that the difference is you're no longer proving much or proving yourself the same way you do with every sortie that you put on a fighter jet. So we always talk about, you almost do strap on the aircraft. It's not so much, getting in it as it is you're attaching it to yourself, right? For the F-15. And every sortie is an opportunity to prove your worth, I guess, in the squadron, prove your tactical prowess, whatever it is, your combat capability. Obviously, that won't be the case in the airlines, where I'm going to, all the feedback I get from other fighter guys that I know who have gone and done that, to include my father, say that, well, now you're taking everything that you used to just cover in the first minute of the brief. Okay, we're going to the airspace and we're coming back to Lake and Heath, and that's standard. Anybody have any questions? Nope, no questions. Cool. That's the goings and comings, as we say. That's the basic admin flying. All of a sudden, that becomes the entire mission, because when you fly a Delta jet, your whole thing is we are taking off, we are leveling off, we are getting to this place, and we are landing. And that's the, bare minimum of what we've done for so long. I think that lures some people into a false sense of security. And that's what I think is going to be the challenge. Is it doesn't mean that it's easy. It just means that the mission is not as diverse as it is in the Eagle, or as physically challenging. And I think that's where guys get going, okay, well, how hard could it be? It's a computer flying an airplane. And there's a little bit of that. And you do have to babysit the video game. But I think my challenge will be, trying to be the best Delta pilot I can be without that excitement behind each mission,
Thank you. And if you see another aeroplane, don't haul it around the corner and go chasing it.
Yeah. I will try to avoid that natural instinct. I won't even have the only radar that you have on a 737 is a weather radar anyway. So unless I visually see them, I'm going to roll in for a dogfight.
The F-15 has been around for a very long time. Have you and your dad flown some of the same aircraft?
Absolutely.
I know that happened. One of the Air Force generals, his son was flying the same aircraft he'd flown in Okinawa. Yeah.
It has come up. We went through our flight records, and my dad and I found out. Let's see, he became a pilot in 1981. And the first Eagles rolled off the line, first C model Eagles. I guess they were A's at the time, but those same airframes are now C's. The A models rolled off the line in 1978, or some of the oldest ones did. And bottom line, he and I have flown several of the same tail numbers. It's not a ton of overlap, but based on where they were, because let's see, my dad was at McCord, which is up in Washington. He was at Otis for the Air National Guard in Massachusetts. Before that, he was at Nellis and Eglin down here in Florida. But the jets have moved around so much that it took us a while to figure out, which ones by tail number we had actually flown together. And there's like 3 or 4 that we share some sorties in. And that's pretty cool.
And can I ask a question? Obviously, your dad flying the A, obviously there's a vast difference between the A and C model, but you talked about your dad saying what it's like to fly from F-15 to then Delta. Have you sort of swapped stories in terms of what it's like to fly the F-15? Obviously, I'm sure he's very proud of you getting in the C based on his A, but did you have that sort of conversation saying it's slightly different now, Dad, kind of thing? You're old school and I'm new school, if that makes sense. Not trying to put him down, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's it creates an interesting bond where I've always felt like my dad and I were very close. He's a great dad, and he never once growing up made any sort of mention of you will be a pilot or this is what you should do. It was always, hey, I love you no matter what, and whatever it is you choose to pursue, I'm right behind you. And he obviously give advice if and when I wanted it. But I could tell that when I became a pilot, it just opens new doors for relating to one another, right? So being able to tell stories that we can both relate to in a way that was maybe not there when I was just an Air Force officer who had not yet gotten his wings, or when I was in college and all that sort of stuff. So all that to say, we have definitely swapped stories. A lot of them are me trying to hint at capabilities in the aircraft that I can't really tell him about, because although he had all the required security clearances, I'm trying to do like that thing that you used to do, it's better now. And he's like, oh, really? And you're going, that's about all I can say, Dad. And there's that element. And then the other stuff, the unclassified stuff, I could definitely talk about, where, I compare thrust to weight ratios and stuff and tell him about performance in a dogfighting environment specifically. That we trade stories all the time of the tactics that we are doing now are things that I remember my dad saying either they weren't doing it at the time, or they hadn't really discovered doing it at the time, because you're always testing the jet for its maximum capabilities, or were things that by the time he was getting out of the Air Force, they had just started developing. And so he kind of gets to see the full fruition of that as a result of my training and my career, which has been awesome. I've loved it.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Following on from a question about the same tail numbers, did you ever sort of come across any of your dad's ex-colleagues that would say, "Oh, I remember your dad, I flew with him," or whatever?
Yeah, so not on the active duty side. Like most of my dad now is in his late 60s, and I'm trying to think of, while I'm saying that, I'm in the process of trying to think of friends of his that I've met. Most everybody I've met on the active duty side, if they had any knowledge of my dad, they're mostly my peers. If we go all the way up to my commanding officers and whatnot, the distance and the gap is so high that anyone who might have still flown with them, it's like, I'm not talking with 2-star generals generally. Although there is one general that I know who was a friend of my dad, but I knew him through my dad. So it's not like I saw him later in the Air Force and he said, "Oh, I know your pops." It's more so that I will encounter friends of his through him, and then they will tell me stories about having flown with him and whatnot. And every once in a while I'll go to some squadron that he was a part of and see a picture on the wall from the 80s or something like that. That does happen. But the guys who were in there to that day view it the same way I do. They go, "There's a picture from a long time ago from these guys who used to fly here." And it may even be that the building is not representative of the same squadron anymore. I've had that happen where a picture on the wall at Nellis Air Force Base that had my dad in it, that building is no longer even the squadron that it was. It just happens to still be the building still exists, and a new squadron has moved in and taken over, basically. So that kind of stuff happens pretty frequently, I'd say.
What would you say has been the highlight of your career? Something that's really stood out for you, something that you're like, "Oh wow, I'm proud of that."
Yeah, I think it's probably on Taft Garrison in the south of Syria during that deployment. There was a time I remember, it's like seared into my brain, of this particular mission. C models are not typically close air support. We don't do anything that we would do for close air support would be considered emergency close air support, so ECAS. Because if I'm strafing the ground with a air-to-air death chariot like the C model, it's going to be because stuff is real bad, and I'm going to be telling all the friendlies, "Yeah, I'll do it. I'll put rounds into the ground area, but I need everybody to clear away by plus or minus 10 miles so that you're not risking anybody's loss of life, save for the bad guys." I didn't get to strafe the ground while I was over there, but I remember doing the thing that we did do much more often, which was just shows of force and really trying to provide the guys on the ground with some sense of, "Hey, we are here. We have your back in terms of overwatch, and nothing's going to harm you from the sky, at least." And I remember one time there was a convoy of coalition forces, a mixture of British troops and US troops and whatnot, and they're moving from Taft Garrison west back to the actual garrison itself. So they're in that area. They probably have and I'm trying to think of what ranges it would be, but it's probably like a 30-mile drive for them of where they were out in some sort of forward operating station, and they're on their way back to the garrison. And they just asked if I could fly at 3, 4, 5,000 feet above them, just making my presence known. And they had at the back of the Humvee stack, at the back of the convoy, they had big American flag waving out the back of the trunk of this thing, as it were, with a guy on a mounted machine gun there and the flag sticking up. And it's 3 or 4 of them. And I just remember kept crossing out into what was relatively low clouds, but nothing that caused like instrument stuff. It was just low puffies, and then there's mountains in the background at great distances, otherwise just flat desert. And just popping in and out of the clouds to overfly them and watching them drive back, and really feeling like I was making the difference of them feeling safe their whole drive back home. Yeah, that's probably the crowning achievement in terms of most memorable thing. I'm like, yeah, that's the one. Everything else that I feel, every other sense of accomplishment was always something in the training environment of becoming an instructor in the Eagle or becoming an evaluator pilot in the Eagle. So we work our way up from 2-ship flight lead to 4-ship flight lead to instructor pilot. Somewhere in there, you do mission commander as well. So when I became a mission commander and an instructor pilot, and then evaluator pilot is where you can give other people check rides and say that they are blessed to be instructors, or in some cases, you can bless them to also be evaluators. But it's the people making sure that people are current. All those were accomplishments, but they're, you know, kind of what I call report card accomplishments, right? I have a grade sheet that says you did it, and that does feel good because the process was grueling. But that memory there in Syria is one of the ones that just has the most visual appeal, or like visceral appeal, I would say.
Cool. And with that, there's a question I've not asked for a while, actually, but I'd say, obviously, have you participated in, like, I'll say, exercises with other countries, like your ally partners? And what country would you say was your favorite to work with?
Yeah.
And you don't have to say British.
Yeah, but I might though. Let's see. So certainly worked exercises with other countries. When I got there to Lakenheath, when I first showed up as a brand new young wingman, one of the first things I did was go down to Operation Exercise African Lion there in Morocco. And the Moroccan Air Force, they were a class act. I thought that was great. But I didn't know anything from anything. Like, okay, cool. We're working with foreign partners, and I'm just a wingman, so I'm being assigned stuff to do, and or more focused on just getting through the briefings and debriefings than I was about building foreign relations and interacting with my counterparts. But that was good. That was a good time, and it was a lot of fun. Got to work with the Italians a few times. If you go to NATO exercises, which we did quite frequently, like the Tactical Leadership Program, which in my case was at what is that? What is the air base that we went to? It's a small one in Italy near San Giovanni Rotondo. For whatever reason I can't remember the Amendola Air Base. So went there and worked with not only Italians, but there's a lot of NATO countries who were there. I think one of the instructors we had was Belgian, and just NATO countries from all the corners of NATO come to visit. Working with Iceland was always a good time, but they don't have a standing military, so it's just their Coast Guard. But they were great hosts and everything. I think it was fun to be there in their country, which has a lot of beauty to offer. But the interactions with them were mostly just in like the hospitality range. And then I'd say the exercises that really come to mind are, I'm going to go ahead and shout out the UK counterparts, but it was doing the point blank stuff. So point blank is a exercise, if you're not familiar, that happens quarterly in the UK, and you go out to the 323s in the North Sea there, and usually talking 4 to 5 days, about a week's worth of training, consisting of some 30 plus aircraft. And it's usually the Dutch will come over and play. Sometimes we'll get guys from Aviano, US participants from Aviano can hop over and play. And then it'd be us, it'd be RAF working with us, usually from Lossy or Coningsby. Who else would play? I mean, usually the Mildenhall guys would get involved as well. Sometimes we had the Spec Ops, US forces simulating low, slow targets that we would have to go find in the middle of this big air war. But between the Dutch and the British, I would say that was our nearest allies in the region and most near peer in terms of how we all train. We all spoke the same language, right? It's the standard, at least among NATO stuff, that we were able to talk the same talk and walk the same walk, and integrating a mission with the Brits or the Dutch was always rewarding and always easier than you'd think for making two massive countries' militaries work together.
Great.
Yeah.
And sorry, on that question, obviously with Lakenheath being such a large base and such a large number of squadrons there, was there one squadron that was better at partying than the other?
Sorry. So with the, so say it one more time. Sorry.
Yeah,
let me get that question again.
so with the Lakenheath having so many different squadrons based
Yeah,
there, were the C guys always trying to party more harder than the E guys? If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
That's, I thought that was your question. I'm making sure I understood it. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's, so the makeup of Lakenheath, like you said, multiple squadrons. When I first showed up, we just referred to them by color. We had red, blue, green, and gold. Green were the jollies, the guys who will pick somebody, search and rescue, right? And they were flying helicopters, and they moved shortly after. Let's see, let me think about this. I got there, and I want to say that I was only there for 6 months before they had actually moved that squadron out of Lakenheath. So then it's all fighters, and it's the Strike Eagles, red and blue, Panthers and Bowlers, as you guys are familiar. And then gold was the Grim Reapers. And the red and blue building, the Strike Eagle complex, we call it, they share a building. It's separated up a staircase that if you go left, you go down to the Bowler side of things. If you go right, then you go to the Panthers side of things. And we would have joint roll calls from time to time, big old joint wing parties that were all about the piano burn and telling stories and singing songs. And we're using probably their building to do it because it was larger, because it housed 2 squadrons. Or we were using some big wing building to make that happen. Otherwise, if we were having separate roll calls, then absolutely it was a challenge to see if you could out party the other guys. Or set the standard for some new spirit mission. I remember as a young wingman several times being tasked with what is close to probably not a lawful order, meaning you can't really be ordered to do it, but your commanders are saying, hey, it's going to be a really good idea for you to go and steal the display missile that the Panthers have in their foyer when you walk in. And so you'd go over there and you'd get a bunch of people together and you'd take some 15-passenger van, lay all the seats down, and you're going to go steal the AMRAAM that's on display over there, which, by the way, is filled with concrete or something for stabilization, right? And it just sits there, so it's not light. And we would go take it, and then they'd steal it back. Or we'd go into their bar and take some of their paraphernalia, and they'd do the same for us. And there are still places in each squadron where you can go find something that is out of place because it's been there for 10 years from when it was stolen from the vault of this other squadron, and nobody bothered to go retrieve it, or they stole something back and now it will forever be held, those 2 items, in ransom for one another, and never will there be a prisoner exchange to actually resolve the problem. Otherwise, yeah, we would go out in true fighter pilot fashion to whatever city we were going to establish dominance in that evening, and try to out party one another. But if we did ever encounter each other out on the town, it was usually to make the party grander. So we would just combine forces and start rolling that way. The rivalry only lasted so long after enough pints, right?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Sorry for joining late, Michael. I had some family problems to sort out, but during your time at Lakenheath, is it true you were prohibited from flying anywhere around Newmarket or over Newmarket? Because my dad lives there.
Yeah. There is and that's a throwback. I forgot about that entirely. But yeah, we have actually for most of the populated areas, it's a general, please avoid, this ring for 3.7 miles or so and at least 2,000 feet. And it varies based on what airports are in the area, because some of the airspaces, no kidding, you cannot be there. And that has to do with who controls the tower for little airfields and whatnot. Other airspace was just a please don't, because Lakenheath gets, as you might imagine, every day somebody is calling Lakenheath with noise complaints. And it's the same. It's the same thing in the States, where yes, most people, I would say, of course, I'm skewing the numbers in my favor, but I would say an overwhelming majority of people appreciate the spectacle and the noise of fighters. But you're always going to get those 1 or 2 who are going to call every day with well, they're not supposed to be that low, they're not supposed to be that loud. They, gave my dog a heart attack. They ruined my nap. I don't know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Newmarket was on there as a, please don't directly overfly the town. It would, happen.
Yeah.
It would happen from time to
Yeah.
time, but it was supposed to be an avoidance thing.
And another quick question,
Mm-hmm.
did you ever do much training with forces on the ground over Salisbury Plain training area?
No, the Strike Eagle guys would be, the E model, that'd be more their bread and butter. Our training with ground forces was usually limited to trying to avoid ruining their operation or exercise. Because if we were flying that low, it was probably just for low level training. And if we're not integrating with them, it could just be a distraction. So the Strike Eagles, that was more their bread and butter. And we stayed away from, I'm trying to think if there's one time I went over there. I don't think so. I don't think I ever did. Maybe somebody in the squadron would get integrated with some sort of ground operation, but if it was, it would just be for a show of force type demonstration from, mostly air to air platform.
Yeah, I know they do buzz down over Salisbury training area quite a lot because I see them up on the live flight trackers, but not like every week or every month. It'd be just every now and again.
Yeah. I think I got up there. I definitely wasn't integrating with anybody. I've flown around there before, but it wasn't for it wasn't for any sort of exercise or anything.
All right, cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Michael, what about your boys if they decided that they wanted to become fighter pilots? Would you be happy with that, or would you sort of go, "Oh, no, 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 no"?
Yeah, no, I'd be thrilled. I think that some of the same stuff I talked about earlier with the identifying with my dad a little bit more in ways that I never thought. I did not think that the relationship with my dad was lacking at all. And then you discover this whole new world that you now both have to relate to. And that's something I wouldn't trade in terms of my connection with my own dad. With my kids, I would probably say the same things that my dad said to me of, hey, it's not all fun and games. And in fact, a lot of it is the Air Force finding a way to remove all the joy from flying, right? If they can make it happen, they're going to kill the joy of flight, is the joke we sometimes make. And that's not by their own fault. That's because there's a mission to do, and it's not about going out and just enjoying the thrill of being airborne. So for my kids, I would tell them, yeah, that's great. It's awesome. I hope the best for you. I just know that it's a long and grueling road. So be prepared for that. And it can be taxing on the family. So be prepared for that. And I probably tell them not to go into it with the mindset of, I'm not going to let the Air Force poison it. So I'm going to always hold on to the spark of the joy of aviation. Even when those days even when you're waking up super early to go do the mission you don't want to do, and it's an upgrade, and you have all these people judging you in your capability, and they're going to tell you about it too. They're going to tell you what you didn't do right, and you're going to have to sit there and take it. I would want them to know that that's part of it as well, that is the dream. I think it's funny you bring that up. I was just talking about this the other day. I don't know, I know US basketball is not a thing that necessarily permeates the whole world, but when Kobe Bryant was still alive, famous US basketball player, he had a quote that I'm paraphrasing, but he used to tell his daughter that, there are people who will spend all the 4 a.m. wake ups and extra training and going and running drills and all this sort of stuff as a professional athlete. And they'll go through that thinking, okay, but when do I finally get to achieve my dream of, like, I've gotten there and I am the professional athlete, star of the world, global sports star. And he goes, those people don't realize that the 4 a.m. wake ups and the extra training and the always trying to better yourself and the grueling approach to your craft, that is the dream, right? That's still the dream. You never, if you want the dream to continue, then you have to keep doing that. And that's what I would want my kids to understand in terms of fighter pilots. No different. You just have to keep your nose to the grindstone, as it were. And as long as they know that, I'm very happy to have them go do it.
I can remember going to the careers officer and saying, when I grow up, I want to be a fighter pilot. And he said, son, you can't do both. So
That's a good one. Absolutely. And I hope never to grow up. If I can make it happen, I'll keep picking fighter pilot every time.
And sorry, can I ask a question on the back of that? Obviously, you're going to be flying for the Guard, and you're also going to be flying for Delta. How do you coordinate the diary? How do you?
Yeah.
That must be really difficult.
It's actually, so the US has a lot of laws about if you are a serving Guards member on a part-time status, the airline and Guard interplay, because the airline gets so many of their pilots from highly qualified military operators, and were they to give that up, they would be hurting much more than they already are in terms of pilot shortage and ability to hire people. There's a very good government to airline to Air National Guard triad, as it were, of prioritization. And part of that are several congressional acts and whatnot that let Delta know that if I tell them I have military orders to go do this for the Guard, they have to allow me up to, I mean, I'm just making up numbers here, but they have to allow me up to X days per month, and it can't interfere with this kind of show time or this kind of rest time and all that. And so there are guys who will get hired by Delta and will drop a full year of active duty orders and say, all right, Delta, I'll see you next year. And they're still employed. You know, obviously they're not making money from trips and whatnot, but they're still employed. They're ranking up seniority. And that's all part of the allowance that Delta has to give you for, in terms of time, for scheduling and whatnot. The way most guys do it is it's just okay, I can get my trips. It's a process of, I can get my trips from Delta or what they want me to fly. I can go to the Guard unit and go, this is what Delta has for me. Can I sit alert and fly missions this week, this weekend, and these 3 days at the end of the month? And they say, that looks good to us. Or you do it the opposite way. You go to your Guard unit and say, I need orders these days, because I don't want to fly these Delta trips, or that doesn't really coincide with, you know, plans for my family this month or whatever. And then you take those orders direct to Delta and say, please build me a schedule that goes around this. Because they have trips all the time. So they always have the ability to say, okay, great. Then it looks like you're flying that Tuesday to Thursday, the next Tuesday to Thursday, and the last Friday to Tuesday, because that's all you have available from the Guard. So it's actually not as, it could be an advantage at times from hearing it from some of my friends, that you can actually, although it sounds busier and it sounds like a nightmare, the fact that you have both those available to you, you can use either one to help manage the other's schedule. So when you need to do some schedule shaping, you have some reasons why you're adjusting the diary.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So what? Oh, go on, Matt.
I'll say. So you've flown at night at times. So do you prefer flying during the day or night time?
I prefer flying during the day. We always say, I don't know that you'll find a fighter pilot. Oh, okay, I'll give a caveat here in a minute. But you will always hear fighter pilots say, for the night is dark and full of terrors, because it is. And every time we brief a night week, I mean, that's when you're almost asking for something to go wrong, because that's going to be when you have an electrical failure and now the cockpit is dark and quiet and it's dark outside. And that's just not a great thing a great scenario to be in. The other stuff about night is it's just a lot going on for limited sensory perception of one of your main senses, right? The fact that you're looking outside and going like, well, I can't really orient myself. It's like being stuck in the weather. It's like, I can't really orient myself based on anything other than the instruments in the aircraft. But regardless of clouds or storms or whatever, that's just the answer the whole time. And it makes ground ops tougher. I don't think people think about that from outside. I certainly didn't, from outside the fighter pilot world, of even just walking to the jet. If it's not in a covered area, if it's already parked out on the ramp and you're starting out there, you're using a flashlight to do the walk around and to get in, and you'll drop a pencil, almost a promise, because it's a night week, you're going to drop a pen or pencil, and that's going to be the time where you didn't see where it went because it's dark. And before the jet starts up, the whole cockpit is dark, et cetera, et cetera. So I can go on and on about those little annoyances. And night vision goggles are not particularly comfortable. They put a lot of strain on your head and neck attached to the helmet there, because the center of gravity is now out here as you flip them down to your eyes. They're not great for your eyes too. You can imagine night vision goggles really just take all the ambient light available and they focus it aggressively at the back of your retina. So how good can that be for eyesight? Not positive yet. I'll find out in 20 years when I'm making claims to the veterans hospitals and whatnot. We'll see. but all that stuff kind of combines to go, all right, night week is all right, it's coming up and we got to do night stuff, but we'll everybody will get night recurrent and then we'll call it good for another few months. The reason that I pause for just a minute with the caveat is there is a moment where you're flying at a starry night, maybe you're out over the North Sea and like the stars are reflecting over the sea and everything just looks like stinking Star Wars of, it's like you're in space, it's tranquil. And a lot of times the mission demands are less, like taking a boat out onto an undisturbed lake early in the morning, or even in the middle of the night, where all you have is you don't have the traffic and the hustle and bustle of everything else going on usually. And we in the fighter world usually taper down the mission requirements to match that, to help prevent safety concerns, right? If I can remove some of the mission demands, then you're not worried about doing so much. It doesn't need to be a complicated mission also at night. The fact that you're flying at night is already part of the complication. So anyway, that's the part I like about it, because when you're out there and it's just quiet. And I remember one time setting I think it's still the speed record I have in the Eagle, for me personally, not like a speed record for the Eagle, but that was the time I went Mach 1.8 out over the North Sea, because we were going to be done early and there's no one else in the airspace. And so we have the whole run of the 323s. And me and my flight lead were just doing consecutive speed competitions. And I got to 1.8 in a descent from like 48,000 feet on the way out of the airspace. I had to slow it down quickly thereafter because we were approaching the land. But, after that, it was a good time. So that's the part I like, coupled with definitely prefer the day.
Cool.
How do you see your career progression with Delta? So I'm just wondering, will you be starting off in the right-hand seat and then, you'll get your captaincy at some point? Is that going to take very long, do you know?
Yeah, so Delta and all the major carriers, at least in the United States, you always start as a first officer, but all the airlines will tell you, we hire captains, and that's just more of a mantra in terms of what they're looking for in candidates. But that is also bleeds into the process by which one can upgrade, which is you can be a first officer who spends your first year in the right seat and then decides, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for the upgrade right now. It does depend on seniority, which is truly just a seniority measure based on your date of hire. But there are always upgrades available and guys can make the jump very early. I see personally my progression going, I'd rather be a somewhat senior first officer than the lowest captain in the bunch, because right as you make your way out of, you're flying every Christmas and Thanksgiving and every weekend and all the middle of the night trips and all that, you could very easily relegate yourself right back to that by just going to captain too early. But there is no truly too early. If you want to eat that, if you want to have that be your life, then plenty of guys decide to bite the bullet right away and go, all right, I did my 1 year of probationary first officer employment and I'm going to go ahead and make the upgrade to captain. And provided they don't have any sort of mishaps or anything on their record, then that's not untenable. I think I will probably spend more time to become a more senior first officer and then make the jump. I've also heard people say that as much as the airlines want you to do the upgrade, you can spend, like with Delta, for instance, right now, they have nothing in their contracts clauses about, they have no clause in their contract about mandatory upgrades. Some airlines do, but Delta right now does not force anybody to become a captain. So some guys go, man, why do I want the captain's responsibility when I can be the person who assists the captain and I'm still being paid well and I still have the hours I want and I'm a very senior first officer or whatever the case may be. For me, I think the challenge of wanting to be the best version of whatever it is that I'm trying to do will ultimately compel me to go to captain. I just don't know how quickly that will be.
Is there also like a certain allocation of first officers to captains? So you perhaps have to wait for a vacancy to come along, or
Yeah, there is. It's just right now the airlines are hiring like crazy. I don't know how it is with the other than flag carriers. Like I'm not very familiar with. I know for a fact that in the United States, the pilot shortage is in the news every day, right? Like, okay, airlines are hurting, they're reeling, they're hiring like crazy. It's a great time to be applying to and having been applied to the airlines because they were giving out interviews to everybody, and they were going so far as to almost say, hey, the job is yours to lose. But they didn't quite say that. They want you on your seat a little bit more. But we all knew going into the interview, coming from the military, especially with our backgrounds, that it was something of a formality in terms of, yes, they're going to interview you, make sure you're not a crazy person, make sure you don't have any skeletons in the closet that they wouldn't have found from a normal background check, which with a security clearance is not a factor anyway. But we knew that the pilot shortage was driving a lot of movement into the airlines and in the airlines, which is still the case. So there is a ratio of first officers to captains, but everybody is either pushing out the top so quickly in terms of people who are reaching retirement age or being hired in so quickly and all the movements in between, that if you are the guy who's like, I want to upgrade right now, and they go, well, there's no captain spots available on your airframe. The answer is wait another 2 weeks and try again. And it'll be, oh, yep, now we got one. It's about that fast. There are, this, may not concern you guys from a fighter pilot standpoint, but on the Delta side of things, for instance, my initial base that is assigned to me is Los Angeles, which I live in Florida. I will be a commuter to Los Angeles to start my trips. It's kind of a hell of a commute to fly that far just to start your actual trip. And we don't plan on moving out there. But the reason it's not really a big deal, and the reason I'm not like, shucks, I wish I'd gotten something else, is because they are moving things so quickly in terms of reflowing pilots to different areas that I will have a chance before I'm even done with my training for the 737, as I go to start that in just a little bit. Before I even start the training or finish the training, I will have a chance to bid for a new base, and I'll probably get it because they're moving everything around. So I may never even set foot in LA, despite the fact that that's where I'm based, as it were.
Are you able to talk us through the training syllabus for the 737? Sort of like there's so many weeks of ground school simulator or whatever.
Yeah, so the flow to get into Delta Airlines is you go to what's literally called indoctrination. The Air Force has it too. It always sounds funny to me that we use that term, which in my mind sort of has a connotation of I'm poisoning your mind with my dogma, or I'm brainwashing you, right? But nevertheless, I'm going to go be indoctrinated into Delta, and that is a 10-day process or so of here's what it's like to work at Delta. Here's getting you registered in the computer system. Here's your electronic flight manuals and all that, and some classes on what I would call the administrivia of the Delta enterprise. How do you book a schedule or a trip? How do you manage pay stubs and taxes and all these sort of things? So all the background stuff to just getting a job. And that concludes with a winging ceremony after the 10 days of, okay, now you're in the system, you're a real Delta pilot, but you are not yet qualified on whatever aircraft we're going to have you fly. In my case, I'll finish indoc. I will take a few weeks. I've looked at the schedule now and I've seen the syllabus flow. They're not that backed up in the 737 in terms of availability of simulators and all that stuff. So I'll have just a week or two, and then I go back to start the simulator flow. And that is, the first simulator is exactly what you talked about, where it's really ground school. There's no simulator involved, but you are in a sim building, and you do new hire day, where they tell you, here's what the 737 is like. There's manufacturer familiarity day, where you just learn about Boeing isms that are typical of all Boeing aircraft. And then you start it's like a college course or university course. You start the 100 level simulators, which is switchology. So I don't remember offhand how many there are, but sitting down in the cockpit and going, all right, let's get familiar with just the checklist flow. Where is this switch? Where is that switch? What does this display do? You'll do that. And then you go, that's the 100 level. And then there's the 200 level and the 300 level and the 400 level. And all told, the syllabus takes something on the order of 2.5 months, because they know how to fly an airplane. That's not the issue. right? You know how to pilot or you wouldn't be there. You're qualified to hold an airline transport pilot certificate. And most of us come from, well, everybody comes from some aviation background, whether that's regional airlines or military guys. So now all they have to do is bless you on the complicated systems that govern the whole thing. And that's back to my original joke of, yes, I'm babysitting a computer flying the airplane, but you got to have the babysitter there, because when the computer doesn't do it right, nobody wants that press, right? Or that potential catastrophic problem. So yeah, that's the syllabus flow. It's much shorter than any Air Force syllabus I've been through. Like I said, the training for the F-15 alone was coming up on a year. I guess it was closer to like 8 months, but all told, but we were there for quite a while. So in that sense, it's really quick by comparison, but it does sound like a lot of the same stuff. Just looking at the syllabus, I go, this is not any different than learning any other airplane. You just got to start memorizing how to do stuff. And I always make the analogy of, it's probably, if you are an Android or iPhone user or whatever gadget ecosystem you're in, if I hand you the opposite, like if you're an iPhone guy and I hand you an Android, you'll figure it out, but it's going to take you a little bit. If I ask you, quick, adjust the brightness, you're going to go, hang on, I need a minute for the menu and for the trying to find that. And from all accounts from my fighter pilot brethren and sisterin, the move to the big jets is a lot like that. It's like, yeah, I know how to fly, but you got to tell me, you got to give me a second to figure out how I tell the jet to do the thing I want it to do.
Sorry, and on the back of that, obviously you mentioned before about scheduling, and obviously everyone works together, which is obviously quite a unique scenario within the world, which America does and probably no other country actually does. But currency on both types, obviously there's going to be a point if you're going towards more Delta for whatever reason, then you're going to have to get your currency back on the F-15 and vice versa. Is that something that, again, the scheduling will take into consideration, so you don't have that time wasted to be reevaluated to go back into the particular aircraft? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can absolutely make those requests with scheduling. I can be the same as any other limiting factor that I'd put in with Delta. For instance, I could, just like I normally would, of saying, well, Delta, I have orders on these days. I could call my unit and say, if I don't fly on the 25th of this month, then I'm going to be non-current and you guys are going to have to give me recurrent. And they go, okay, well, we'll give you orders to come out here and fly on the 24th. And I would take those to Delta and go, I got to do this. And even if that means dropping a trip, Delta's prepared for that with the whole structure of reserve pilots that they maintain. That's the idea, is plenty of times I'll be the pilot sitting reserve, and maybe I'll get called, maybe I won't. And there are other pilots at all times who are doing that very thing, sitting at home, waiting for a phone call on maybe having a trip or not, aside from the normal scheduled stuff. I will say that it's pretty common in the fighter pilot world amongst guardsmen and reservists. Right now, we have some attached reservists at the 83rd at USAF, where I am the DO, or I'm the outgoing DO. Sorry, Director of Operations. I said that earlier, just making sure I'm not confusing my acronyms here. But we have attached reservists who come in every once in a while to assist with the missile shoots, and they try to line it up when we have their airframe attending. So when a visiting squadron or visiting unit is coming through to shoot missiles and is bringing, for instance, Strike Eagles, our Strike Eagle reservist, who is also a Delta pilot, I'll bring that up, he's also a Delta pilot, he will drop reserve orders, maneuver his trips to give him a 2-week chunk or so in the middle of the month, and he'll come out and fly with us. But it usually comes at the cost of, he shows up and he goes, guys, I am dead for everything. I don't have landing currency. I don't have tactical currency on these things. And so we always have to build that in on the Air Force side to the schedule. For instance, this last one is what I'm thinking of as an example. He showed up, he hadn't flown the Strike Eagle in a minute, and I got in his back seat as another qualified pilot, although I'm not a Strike Eagle guy. We have some interesting waivers that I won't get into that. We have some interesting waivers on regulations specifically for USAF because we have a lot of different pilots from different major weapon systems. Bottom line is, he had to fly with another qualified pilot in the aircraft just so we could check him off, like, cool, all your currency is back up to date. We file the appropriate paperwork. And then that's usually the greatest cost. There is a point where if you don't fly for long enough, but we're talking like over 300 days, you would, no kidding, have to go back to the actual qualification course and get re-blessed by the initial qualification people. That is, I'm going to touch wood here, but that is something I have never seen happen in somebody's career unless they were, I think one case I heard of a guy who got hung up in some sort of investigation for something that he was at a party that he shouldn't have been at, but he actually didn't know that somebody else there was involved with some drugs or something. OSI gets investigating. They have everybody grounded for the time being while they're doing the investigation. And they ultimately cleared him and said, no, you're good. But he had sat for so long in this, criminal investigation that he had to go back and get a qualification again. But that's very rare.
Understand. So whoever
Yeah.
does the planning's got a bit of a headache then, really, in terms of
Yeah.
balancing everything, So
Yeah,
you probably,
we roll our eyes a little bit when our reservists roll in. We love them to death, but it's the like, okay, all right, well, make sure we have a sortie for you on the first day where it's nothing but you going out and getting current again. And that's just something you have to build into the schedule.
yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask you a question about we might be going out to Kadena. Well, I am going out to Kadena in Okinawa in October this year.
Yeah.
Do you know why they're sending the F-15s back and then they're sending F-16s there from Spangdahlem in Germany? I just thought, oh no, I want to go out there and see different F-15s because I love them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I shake my head a little bit and roll my eyes because it's the answer is probably as unsatisfying to you as it is to me, which is the Air Force is doing government bureaucracy stuff. And it's not all bureaucracy. I mean, there's some, to be totally fair to them, there are good considerations for why the Eagle is probably on its way to a sunset, which is what they're talking about right now, is that the C model will probably not be around in its current capacity. Pick a date in the future. I've heard them all, it's next year, but it's not gonna be next year. It's 2027, it's 2030, whatever it is. We've heard it with the A10 for, gosh, decades now, of they're going to retire the A10 and then they just never do. They are actually making steps toward getting the C model sunsetted, as it were, which is a nice term for buried in a graveyard. But the sunset it and disseminate it to the remaining guard units that will continue to fly it. So no longer active duty side of things. And Kadena is part of that stand down. And they're supposed to be, the irony of it is, why are we taking fighters away from a base just to replace it with an equally aged fighter in smaller rotations? That's not the full story, because eventually the Air Force is still talking about all their acquisition of the F-15EX, which I have done the simulators for. I have not flown the physical aircraft. I've flown against it in a C model, and it's a very capable aircraft, and it will be an awesome asset to have. I don't know how many we'll get and when. I can't speak to all that, but the rumors that flow, the rumors that surround it are, we'll get a normal fighter loadout of them, and we'll start putting them where the C model used to be. And probably, this is the other rumor that I can talk to freely, they are talking about a common qualification across the greater F-15 community, meaning what it may be in the future is that you have the C, wherever it's left, the C model will be at the guard units and whatnot, the E, wherever it's left, which is still on the horizon as foreseeable future, and the EX. So the C, the E, and the X will all exist as one single qualification, meaning I will go to a qualification course, or would have as a younger pilot, and instead of being a C model pilot, I would be an F-15 pilot, and I just have a specialization. When somebody asks me, they go, okay, so you're legally qualified to fly any of them because the flying's not that different, but you're only mission qualified in the C model as an air-to-air pilot. And that may be where things go. This is all the drawdown of Kadena and moving other fighters there is all part of the future maneuvering for the greater Eagle community, which should include all three of those that I mentioned. If that kind of helps the understanding.
It does, yeah. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
It's an incredible aircraft, the F-15, isn't it?
Yeah, I love it to death. I'm always surprised. It's what I answered earlier to Matthew's question. I think it was about would I choose it again? I go, well, knowing what I know now, absolutely. I think there's something about being part of the legacy fighters. And we just use that for anything. We use that for anything that's 4th gen, because now we have the new 5th gen goodness. But there's something about being part of that, because it feels very, without some of the bells and whistles, it feels like hand flying sport. It feels like an athletic feat to fly that thing sometimes. And she's got the power to back that up, to back that attitude up. And I really have appreciated that about flying her.
Well, I've been in this hobby for a long time now, and seeing the Eagles when they were at Bitburg and Soesterberg, and of course they've all gone now.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
really sad. Really sad.
Yeah, it's when they did that, like that, I wish I could have gotten out there for the final party that they did. They had one out at Lakenheath to try to say, all right, no more Eagles in Europe, and they invited guys who used to be stationed there in Bitburg. They basically invited anybody who was ever in any Eagle squadron anywhere to come out and celebrate sort of a wake, honestly. Have the funeral, as it were, the funeral party for the Eagle out there in Europe, and that just seemed like it was a great time, guys. It's bittersweet. It is cool to be part of the end of an era, but only so cool because I don't like that the era is ending, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks ever so much. That was a good answer. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got a question of someone that said, it's a kind of, I've not come across it, but they was basically asking, is it true the fighter squadrons at Lakenheath didn't like the HH-60 squadron being there?
I think if they didn't like it, my impression from showing up when they were there, it was more just because it created scheduling conflicts and airspace conflicts, right? Once they were gone, we had a little bit more freedom of maneuver to use the airspace directly over Lakenheath. So that was probably what that rumor was. In terms of interacting with those guys, no issues whatsoever. It was awesome whenever they were there, but I know it did create some, you're vying for limited resources. You think, well, there's hundreds and hundreds of miles of airspace, like, right, but you want to set up hundreds and hundreds of miles of aerial engagements. And oh, by the way, the Strike Eagles want to use the overland stuff to do simulated targeting of, bad guys there. And the HH-60s want to go practice drops and recoveries, which means you can't fly in and out of these certain corridors because they may be jumping out or jumping back in. And it was just another piece to manage.
Okay, I think Matthew's got a question to ask.
Yeah.
Okay, so considering that the F-15 so quick question, would you prefer the F-15C or the EX? Considering that the F-15EX has the fly-by-wire, would you prefer sort of the more fly-by-wire feel or the manual feel of the F-15C?
Yeah, I much prefer, it's a great question. I much prefer the feel of the F-15C, having done, again, just the simulators for the EX, but talking to my friends who have flown both. I don't appreciate that there is the EX lets you be a voting member. I don't mean to disparage other aircraft that do this as well, because I get that there is a certain point where the computer can be an assistance to you. There is a certain point where it would be good for you to be able to pull on the stick as hard as you can and let the computer sort out how to give you the maximum capability of the aircraft without breaking it. I like the idea that, I like the capability in the C model that if you need to, you could break it. And by that, I mean, you could exceed the limits of it without actually, nothing's going to break. I mean, you have a lot of G that you could pull beyond the true G limits before you start ripping the wings off. But the idea that in a combat scenario, you could, if you need to, pull 10 Gs, 11 Gs, that's certainly what I'm going to be doing if I'm ever up against a flanker, because I'm not going to run the risk that, he can outrate me or anything like that. That is the downside in my mind to the EX. Now, I will caveat that with, we're getting better with that stuff all the time. All the air forces of the world are getting better with that stuff all the time. And there is something nice about, okay, I will tell the jet what I want it to do. It will run the numbers and tell me, this is the best you can do in this scenario, so here you go. If we can get that down to actually delivering the maximum capability of the aircraft at all times, then I'm all for it. But for now, I prefer the manual input if I can have it.
I'll
Thank
chime
you.
in real quick.
Hey, yeah.
I just wanted to say, hey, thank you, and fellow Washington resident.
Nice. Nice. Yeah.
Right. Tacoma, Washington, eh?
Yeah. That's where I was born. I mean, I was born up there when my dad was flying at McCord. I was born at Fort Lewis. And I have, no, I've been back since. I have no recollection of that time because we lived there he was at the end of that assignment. He and my mom were on their way out of Washington, and I came along, and then like 3 months later we left. And then I've only been back since because we have family there and friends and whatnot who still live. But yeah, I always loved the Northwest. When I got to go back to Oregon for the C model training, we'd go to Washington a few times just to see friends and family and hang out there in Puyallup. Yeah, it's nice.
Outstanding. I'm
Yeah.
sure at some point I'm kind of an old fart. You or your dad has probably thrilled me at some point or another.
Maybe. Are you so you're out there? Are you
I'm
out there
in Spokane.
now?
I'm
Nice.
right next to Fairchild. So
Nice.
I make a living chasing you guys around and taking pictures of you.
Nice. That's
So,
awesome.
Much appreciated for your service.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure. They let me fly planes and I still can't believe it. So
Right. Cheers.
yeah,
I
cheers.
just want to check, Andrew, are we okay for time? Because we've been on an hour and a half, but there's no time limit. I just want to make sure you're comfortable. If you're okay for a few more questions, if people have got it.
Yeah, that's fine. I was glancing at my watch. Because we started early anyway, like all I have to do after this is throw some more things in a bag. I'll and make sure I'm all packed up, and then I'm getting on the road for the drive up to Atlanta. And yeah, that's fine with me. If we want to keep it going, we can. I'll let you know if it's getting too squirrely and I got to get
That's
moving.
fine. I thought I'd just check that we still.
Thank
got
you.
enough
I
time.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Andrew, I've got a quick one. I've been quite kind of pressured into asking it by Matt because
Yeah.
he wants it live on the recording.
Got
Basically, going away from jets, warbirds. Would you if you ever got the chance to fly one, which one would you prefer to? And now you don't have to say a Spitfire, you can say a Mustang if you want, but it's just your personal preference.
Yeah. No, gosh, I take any. I don't. Probably the Mustang comes to mind, but I mean, I think that's kind of the typical American answer, right? Is I want to fly the P-51, I want to fly the Mustang. But if I could fly, probably the P-38, honestly. That whole design to me was just, I mean, what a crazy piece of engineering. What a crazy piece of engineering that thing was. And we have the Lightning II now in the F-35, but to fly the Lightning back in the day, I don't know, that's just something about it's somehow bulky and odd looking without being unappealing. And I think to me that just there's an engineering draw to that makes me want to use it to go put some bullets somewhere. That seems like that'd be a good time.
I thought you would have said the Mustang or possibly the P40.
Yeah, I
Because
was
it's
thinking
like-
P42. Like if you could, gosh, man, it's just you can't go wrong with any of them. Anytime I'm reading about any of those guys and the stuff they did, or you see it in a video game even, and you're like, God, this would just be so cool to go do. So absolutely. I think though probably the 38 would just be because I think that's one that you don't often think of, but it still falls in that category for me. So
yeah, the Mustang and the Spit is just it's a cliche answer, everybody says, because it's probably the two most famous warbirds out there. So
yeah.
P-38 is nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that me in your background? It might be actually.
That is you in my background. Yeah.
Nice, dude. Nice. All right, I'll take it. I love that. I have that picture somewhere because you sent it to me or somebody did. I got to figure out.
Yeah.
I
I
think
there was a bunch of us on that. There was me, Darren Jones.
That's right. Yeah. Darren Jones is there.
He's now living in north of Scotland, so yeah, he's not near me anymore, so I don't get up there as much.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's you. Yeah. I had to put it up.
Yeah,
put it
got
up.
to. Yeah, a little shout out. I appreciate it.
No
Yeah,
worries.
sorry to put you on that, Joe, but I know Joe's a Spitfire lover, so I always get him sometimes. He usually says it himself, but I thought I'll ask you if he would like to say that.
Nice.
See if we can get you to say Spitfire, but obviously
Nice.
P38 and that.
Yeah, I'll take them all though. If any of you guys are offering, I'll take a Warbird ride at anything. So let me know.
I've got a question actually. Was there ever a time in your career that you ever considered? I know you love the F-15, that, but was there before that maybe, or would you ever have considered rotary?
I would like to have it as a skill. It didn't appeal to me militarily or tactically in terms of what I wanted to do. I wanted to fly fast jets. That was just my drive. It's not that I would have turned it down. If you had told me, well, your options are, you're going to get this heavy transport aircraft or these helicopters, I would have done rotary wing. And I think, and the reason I say it's a skill set I'd love to have, I think it's awesome that at least in the Air Force, the US Air Force, if you go rotary, you can always come back and fly fixed wing because they go through the first half of UPT, the first half of pilot training, the same way the rest of us do. And that's all fixed wing flying. So then they go get their rotary training for the other half of pilot training. And that is a skill set that I cannot do in reverse. You could not, without a lot of training for me, just throw me into a helicopter and have me figure it out. There's too many moving parts. The joke amongst us fixed wing people is that I don't have interest in operating a, what is it? Swinging a whirling dervish of moving parts surrounding an oil leak that's resisting contact with the ground through sheer will. That's not what I want to do. But aside from that, the skill set alone, just to be able to do that, seems valuable. And I would do it as more of a hobby, I think.
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
Today I've been chasing aeroplanes in at Mildenhall and Coningsby, part of Cobra Warrior, a big exercise. Did you ever take part in anything like that?
Yeah. Cobra Warrior. Let's see. We did a few things. Aside from the exercises point blank, I think I have on one of my records the participation in Cobra Warrior. I think on the Air Force side, I'm trying to think of why Cobra Warrior wasn't what we called it. It was, so we were involved in exercise Cobra Warrior. On the Air Force side, it was our own exercise that we said we were pairing up with them. I don't remember what we called it, but yes, I've done that with them. And yeah, good time. Just like any time we would interact with the RAF and man, Class X, all those guys. So
today we've been chasing up an Indian Air Force IL-78.
Oh,
yeah,
wow,
that's
okay.
gone into Mildenhall today. Really, really lovely two of them engines. And then this afternoon we had Saudi Arabian Air Force Hercules going to collect their Typhoons.
Yeah, wow.
A long day. Good.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a lot to get to see. When Hercules, because we have the Spec Ops 130s at Mildenhall, and we one time I got to fight them. We don't do a lot of dog fighting with C-130s, but they're down low. They're simulating, I think I said earlier, they simulate low and slow targets that we can go try to ID. And I remember trying to gun one of them in the training environment, obviously. So it's all just, I shot you. No, you didn't. I was behind that tree, or whatever we say as kids growing up. But rolling in behind him to try to shoot him. And now I've got my hands out so you can tell it's a real story. Rolling behind him to shoot him. And he put his flaps down, slowed down, and did the Angel of Death flare dump thing that you see where it does the flares out all the side, all the flare jettisons. And he probably slowed down to, 120 knots, 130 knots, which is not something I can do in an Eagle. So I had a real quick moment of, oh no, this is not going to work. And he lived to fight another day, because, at least as far as the exercise is concerned, because it was actually a challenge. If I'd flown out and then turned back around to shoot him with a missile, then sure. But by that time, his escort had found me. So that's just interesting. You bring up the Hercules, and that's all I ever think of is trying to gun one and realizing it's actually insanely challenging to gun something that is low and slow if they're in your way, you know?
Thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a final question from me, actually. Have you ever participated in any sort of fly pasts or special displays? And with that in mind, did you ever consider, when they did have it, I'm not sure they do it anymore, but there was sort of an F-15 demo, wasn't there, that the US used to do? Was you ever interested in anything like that? Because we've had certain pilots that have had flown the same aircraft, but one was happy to display it, but one was happy just to fly it for its purpose.
Yeah.
Purely for that.
Yeah, I think it doesn't not interest me, if that's a way to say it. I would definitely love to fly even just to display the thing. If I thought that was all I could continue to do, I think there'd be a little bit of heartbreak there in terms of kind of giving up on the mission and saying, well, it's not giving up on the mission. It's just the new mission is recruiting and awareness and building, you know, showing the thing off. There did used to be a demo team, and now they're talking about a demo team actually at Klamath Falls. Kingsley wants to put one together, maybe, if they can make that happen. And it's just the future's so uncertain with the Eagle. I don't know that we'll see that again, but maybe. I have done flybys. I always loved them. So I will say that part was something I loved, as long as it was in addition to the rest of the mission that I could still get to do later in the week or whatever. And I'd be the first to raise my hand for, we're going to overfly this football game or whatever. Or a lot of times you do some sort of tower pass over a base for somebody's promotion ceremony or something like that. But anytime I can volunteer for something in the community or even something for somebody else in the Air Force, yeah, that's really fulfilling. If it was all I was doing, I think I'd have a moment of pause and say, can I keep doing both, please? That would be my ideal.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. Sweet.
I'll tell you what, Andrew, I've never known such a laid back bar as the 493rd bar.
Yeah, man.
We literally had a tour, I think, I think 5 or 6 years ago. We had we went up close with one of the jets, and then went back into the bar, and then literally we saw this pilot taxiing back in, and literally 10 minutes later, he just walked into the bar, opened the fridge, cracked open a Budweiser, said hello, and walked out.
Yep.
I've never known something so like relaxed. If that was the Royal Air Force, that would be so strict. I bet they don't even like allowed to do that.
Yeah, we have every commander is able to post and publish. Most of them do post and publish some sort of memorandum on their squadron's rules of engagement for consumption, for drinking. And it usually is some form of, when flying is done for the day, or the last jets have landed for the day, or maybe all the last jets have taken off and everybody else is canceled, or whatever it is, there's some point of the day where the beer light can be on. And whether that beer light in your squadron is an actual light, which it usually is, or it's just the concept of the beer light's on, so we're going to the bar. I will say that's something I really appreciate about, we've drawn the line in the sand in the Air Force and said, as long as you're on this side of it, good to go. And yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome that we're able to do that. But we still look at some of the stuff that RAF dudes get away with, though, too, in terms of parties and roll calls and all that sort of thing, piano burns and whatnot. And we do all that. And I think it just ebbs and flows in terms of who can push the limits more. Because the RAF videos I've seen of some guys being, I'll just say, like, being as naked as the day they were born, but playing the bagpipes or something around a burning piano. I'm like, I don't know that we'd get away with that. And it's, male and female present there. And you're going, I don't know that we could do that in the Air Force and not have some general say, all right, the fighter squadron's canceled, your jets are canceled, everybody's done.
Nothing wrong with naked bar, it's the law.
That's the law. It's the law. You got to do it.
Obviously, can't take away the memories of flying the F-15 and obviously your experience in the Air Force. But when you left the Grim Reapers, you mentioned about the patch, and obviously you were one of the 4 named on there. Did you bring away any other sort of memorabilia to remind yourself of your time flying with those guys?
Yeah, actually a lot of my wall here. I have my I love me wall that let's see if I can actually this I don't know if this camera will go over there, but this wall of, you know, pictures of things I've done and whatnot. If you look over there to the opening where the stairs are, that tail right about there. Oh no, it's backwards from what I'm doing. That tail flash is from Lake and Heath, and then there's a plaque with the two eagles on sticks, not to mention the big litho there. And then that's actually a picture of me that I don't even remember who took it. It might have been Don Jackson Wyatt from the Don photography. But anyway, bottom line, yeah, everything I can get my hands on. That was something my dad instilled in me early on when I started my Air Force career. Is he goes, he's like, I wish I'd had somebody telling me when I was a lieutenant and captain and working my way up, and talking about himself, obviously. He goes, I wish I'd had a friend who just told me when the opportunity comes up to buy some cool stuff to remember this time in your life, just do it. And yes, it's going to feel like every time you turn around, you're going, and that's how I've even felt. Every time you turn around, you're like, another t-shirt or hat or bandana or patch or coin. And eventually you go, I don't know that I need them all. And I always think back to what my dad said and still says, which is do it, because then you can have the stuff put together and actually look back and go, we did all this when we were young, right?
Yeah. Fantastic. It's a very impressive wall as well. Thank you for showing.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely.
Has anyone got any further questions for Andrew? I think that might be it, Andrew. I think.
All right, man.
I've got to say, this has been an absolutely brilliant talk. Your enthusiasm and the way you've been about it, and you know it's just been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it. So
yeah, man, me too.
This is definitely one of my favorites now. Every time I've done these talks, they've just got better and better.
I'm so glad.
But I'd just like to say thank you very much for giving up your time for this.
Yeah.
It's been brilliant, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. It's been awesome. I guess I didn't really know what to expect. I've done, you know, interviews here and there, but nothing like this, and makes me want to codify some of this stuff. I'm glad we recorded it because I can get it down as a record for, you know, if and when I get to share things with other people, and it helps me take a walk down memory lane myself and remember what was and look forward to what will be, you know?
Yeah, it's been absolutely brilliant. So thank you again.
All right, awesome. Yeah, talk to you guys next time.
Thank you very much.